Hey guys, Jin here, and this is my take on a lightning spear build. It's a pretty straightforward build, you don't need any orbs to make it work well, and it can quickly and consistently clear at least tier 110 pits in about 2 minutes even without fully optimizing. It can also take out tier 8 infernal hordes and Uber Lilith, etc. If you like these kinds of guides, consider liking and subscribing, hitting the bell and leaving a comment. It really helps out a lot, and I appreciate it. So thank you, and now let's get to the build. So starting with the skill tree, we're going to take 2 into Firebolt. Then we're going to come down to our core skills, take 1 into Frozen Orb. We're going to take 1 into Charged Bolts. And we're going to go for Destructive Charged Bolts. In our defensive skills, we're taking 1 into Flame Shield, 3 into Teleport, and go for the Shimmering Teleport. We're also taking 3 into Glass Cannon, 1 into Elemental Attunement, 1 into Ice Armor, and going for Shimmering Ice Armor. In our Conjuration skills, we're taking 2 in Precision Magic, 1 into Ice Blades, and go for the Summoned Ice Blades. Then we're taking 1 into Lightning Spear, and going for Invoked Lightning Spear. We're also going to take 3 into Conjuration Mastery, 3 into Align the Elements, 3 into Mana Shield, and 3 into Protection. In our Mastery skills, we're just taking 1 into Inner Flames to get the 3 in Devouring Blaze. Then we're taking 3 into Static Discharge. Then for our Ultimate skills, we're taking 1 into Permafrost, and 3 into Hoarfrost. Unstable Currents, with both of the additional nodes here. And we're taking 1 into Coursing Currents, and 3 into Electrocution. And lastly, for our key passive, we're going to be going for Overflowing Energy here. Next up we have the Paragon board. So for the Paragon board, we're going to start with the Elementalist Glyph. So dealing fire, cold or lightning damage to an enemy increases all damage we deal to them by 5% for 10 seconds, stacking once per element. For our second board, we're going to go for the Enchantment Master board, and we're going to put in the Unleash Glyph. So after spending 15 mana, we deal 8% increased damage and gain 25% increased mana regen for 3 seconds. For our third board, we're going for Burning Instinct, and we're going to put in the Tactician Glyph. So we'll deal 10% increased damage for 4 seconds after casting a defensive skill. This duration is increased by 4 seconds for each defensive skill not on our action bar. For our fourth board, we're going to go for the Ceaseless Conduit board, and put in the Destruction Glyph, so we get a lot of critical strike damage. Critical strikes also increase all damage the enemy takes from us by 2% for 10 seconds, up to 12%. For our fifth board, we're going for Frigid Fate, making sure we take the legendary node, so we'll deal bonus damage to vulnerable enemies equal to 20% of the total amount of our bonus damage with cold, up to a max of 60%, which is what we'll have. As for the glyph, we're going for Conjurer, so that gives us conjuration damage, but also our conjuration skills have 20% increased duration. For our sixth board, we're going for Searing Heat, and we're going to put in the Exploit Glyph here for that extra vulnerable damage. Also, dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases our damage by 1% for 6 seconds, up to 10%. For our seventh board, we're going straight up from there, and we're going for the Elemental Summoner board, so our conjuration skills have a 10% reduced cooldown or mana cost. They also deal bonus damage equal to 10% of the total amount of our damage with fire, lightning and cold, up to 60%, which will be our bonus, so make sure we grab the legendary node here. And for the glyph, we're going to put in Charge, so we get some crackling energy damage, but also picking up crackling energy grants us 5% increased damage for 5 seconds, up to 15%. And for our 8th board, we go to the Frigid Fate board and go straight up from there, and we're going to grab the Static Surge board. As for the glyph, we're going for Flame Feeder to get that damage to burning enemies, but also we deal 10% increased direct damage to burning enemies. So that pretty much wraps up the Paragon board, All of this is going to be in the build planner in the description below as usual, and that's going to have the skill tree, Paragon board, enchantments, gear, and any changes I make will go in the notes. Next up we have the enchantments. For the enchantments, our first one is going to be Firebolt. That gives us some burning damage over 8 seconds from our skill's direct damage. And that's going to allow us to proc our Devouring Blaze passive and also the Flame Feeder glyph. So super important to get that in. And secondly, we have the Ice Blades enchantment. So for every 40 seconds in cooldowns we spend, we spawn an Ice Blades on a random enemy. Also, Ice Blades cooldown is reduced by 0.5 seconds each time it hits a vulnerable enemy, and 20% of that is applied to our other skills. So really helpful enchantment here. We're going to get a lot of Ice Blades out because we're going to be constantly spamming our Lightning Spear. That's going to in turn spawn a lot of Ice Blades, and that's going to in turn reduce the cooldown of our Lightning Spear even more. So all of that will synergize super well together, especially with our necklace, which I will talk about in the gear. So for the gear, on the left I'll list the affixes and the tempering you want, and the stars will indicate the masterworking. So starting off with the Helm, we're going for a Godslayer crown. That's going to give us all stats, max life, damage to elites, and cooldown reduction. But also this unique aspect: when you stun, freeze, or immobilize an enemy elite, you pull in all nearby enemies and deal 30 to 60% increased damage to them for 3 seconds, and this will occur every 12 seconds. But against bosses, this effect triggers whenever damage is dealt instead. So really handy, huge damage boost from this Helm, definitely helps your offensive arsenal. And you are going to try and masterwork the cooldown reduction. If you don't have access to a Godslayer crown, then you would want to use a normal Helm with intelligence, cooldown reduction, and max life, and you would temper that with warmth and Lightning Spear lucky hit chance. As for the aspect, you would want to go for the ever-living aspect, so you take 10 to 25% less damage from CC'd or vulnerable enemies. And for the masterworking, you would also try and masterwork the cooldown reduction. Next up we have the chest piece. We're just using a good old normal chest piece here. We're going to go for intelligence, mana per second, and armor, and we're going to temper that with total armor and Lightning Spear lucky hit chance. For the masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork the intelligence, and for the aspect, we're going to go with the aspect of concentration. So casting a conjuration skill grants 15 to 25% damage reduction for 5 seconds. Next up we have the gloves. We're going to be using some normal gloves here. We're going to go for crit chance, attack speed, and crit damage, and we're going to temper that with crit damage and lucky hit percent chance for our Lightning Spear. As for the aspect, we're going to go for the aspect of Frozen Orbit. So Frozen Orb will explode 2 additional times at its destination for 45 to 60% of its damage. And you're going to try and masterwork the critical strike chance here. Next up we have the legs. We're going to go for Tybalt's Will here. That gives us all stats, max life, max resource, and damage reduction whilst unstoppable. We also deal 10 to 20% increased damage while unstoppable and for 5 seconds after. And when we become unstoppable, we gain 50 of our primary resource. So we're going to try and masterwork the max life here. If you don't have access to Tybalt's Will, use some pants with intelligence, max life, and armor, and you would temper that with warmth and Lightning Spear lucky hit chance. As for the masterworking, you would masterwork the intelligence. Next up we have the boots. We're going to go for Esu's Heirloom here, and that's going to give us some movement speed after killing an elite, critical strike damage, and resist all. And its unique aspect will give us a critical strike chance increase by 20 to 40% of our movement speed bonus. As for the masterworking, you're going to try and masterwork the critical strike damage here. If you don't have access to Esu's Heirloom, use some normal boots with intelligence, max life, and move speed. As for the tempering, you would temper that with teleport cooldown reduction and lucky hit chance for our Lightning Spear. And for the aspect, you would use the aspect of the Bounding Conduit, so teleport's cooldown is reduced by 1 to 2.5 seconds, and after teleporting, crackling energy hits 2 additional enemies for 5 seconds. Next up we have the weapon. We're going to be going for a two-handed weapon here, and we want to get intelligence, crit damage, and damage or max life. As for the tempering, we're tempering that with crit damage and chance for Lightning Spear to cast twice. As for the aspect, this is our most important aspect. We're going to be using Splintering Energy here, so critical hits with Lightning Spear cause lightning to arc from it, dealing 4,853 damage at max roll to its target and up to 5 other enemies. This damage is increased by your critical strike damage bonus. So that's why we're prioritizing our critical strike damage, and it's no different here. So for the masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork the tempered critical strike damage for that huge crit damage bonus. Next up we have the Amulet. So this is crucial for the build. We're going to try and get a Fractured Winterglass. You can get this by target farming Lord Zir, which you can summon with Exquisite Blood, and that's going to give us a lot of non-physical damage, chance for Frozen Orb projectiles to cast twice, conjuration cooldowns are reduced by 0.3 to 0.5 seconds when a Frozen Orb explodes, and conjuration mastery. Also, casting a Frozen Orb has a 35 to 65% chance to spawn a random conjuration when it explodes, and our conjurations have a 50 to 90% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at nearby enemies on lucky hit. So really good Amulet here, mandatory for the build. I wouldn't recommend doing the build without it. As for the masterworking, you're going to try and masterwork the conjuration cooldowns are reduced when a Frozen Orb explodes. Next up for the rings, we're going to go for a Tal Rash's Iridescent Loop as our first ring. That gives us lucky hit chance, non-physical damage, cooldown reduction, and ranks to potent warding. Also, for each type of elemental damage we deal, gain 10 to 20% increased damage for 4 seconds, up to 40 to 80%, and dealing elemental damage refreshes all bonuses. So really strong ring here. We're going to try and masterwork the cooldown reduction. As for our second ring, we're going to be looking for a ring with attack speed, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage if possible. As for the tempering, we're going to temper that with critical strike damage and lightning spear cooldown reduction. As for the masterworking, you're going to try and masterwork the lightning spear cooldown reduction. As for the aspect, we're going to go with Storm Swirl here, so we deal 15 to 30% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while we have a barrier active. Pretty straightforward here. If you don't have access to the Tal Rash's, then you would use a duplicate of this ring, exact same stats. The only thing you would change is the aspect, and you would use an aspect of Conceited. So that will let you deal 10 to 25% increased damage while you have a barrier active. That pretty much wraps it up for the gear. So for the gems, we'll be using 2 skulls and 1 diamond in the jewellery. We'll be using 2 emeralds in the weapon, and we'll be using rubies in the armour. So that pretty much wraps up the build. Again, all of this will be in the planner in the description below. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video or you made it this far, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and leave a comment in the comment section below as it helps out the algorithm for the video to help get this build out there. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!